last night and look ahead to what's ahead for BYU football.
Trevor Tuesday, perhaps?
It is a Trevor Tuesday.
Mentally,
Indeed.
It's probably Monday for you because you weren't here yesterday.
Yes, well,
but Trevor's here, baby.
We've called it Matich Monday for so long, but yes, we pushed it to Tuesday because of the national championship game last night. Trevor, welcome on a Tuesday. Let's start with that national championship game. What did you think of Ohio State and Notre Dame and how it all shook out in the first ever 12-team college football playoff?
The two best teams got there, and the two most deserving teams got there. I mean, and the 12-team playoff wouldn't have allowed Notre Dame and Ohio State to be in the tournament at all. If this were a 4-team playoff, remember that Notre Dame finished at number 5 in the committee's rankings, and Ohio State at number 6. Neither one would have made the 4-team playoff, but they both beat 2 of the 4 teams in the top 4 in order to get to the national championship game. Ohio State is the best team in the country. And the thing is, they played not just with great skill, they played with fury. And it was fueled by their loss to their rival Michigan in the last game of the regular season. Michigan gave them the gift of rage because it was the 4th consecutive loss to Michigan, this one on Ohio State's home field. After the game, Michigan planted their flag on the block O in the middle of the field. There was a fight that broke out that was broken up by police with pepper spray. And right afterwards, a Michigan player said to the national media, referring to the Buckeyes, some people need to learn how to lose. Well, you talk about rage and fury. The Buckeyes took that out on everybody they played in the playoff, and they got to the final against Notre Dame. Notre Dame came out hot, scored a touchdown on their first drive, and then for the most of the rest of the game, the Buckeyes just shut them down. And it was the combination of skill and just rageful fury that propelled the Buckeyes from the loss to Michigan to the national championship. And when the story is finally written about how everybody responded to that Michigan loss, I think it's going to be one of the great national championship stories in recent memory.
But Trevor, what is it like to finish a season losing to Michigan?
You know, you'll have to ask somebody else what it's like to lose to your rival. Because in the 4 years that I played, we were 8-0 against Utah and Utah State, and it still matters. And thank you for asking, because it still feels good to say that all these years later.
And unlike Ohio State, you beat Michigan to end your career at BYU for a national championship.
Yeah, how about that? And so, yeah, that's something the Buckeyes didn't do this year. But we both won the national championship in that year, so good.
That you did.
Beating Michigan for both equals national championship run.
Oh, fantastic. Trevor Matich is with us on BYU Sports Nation. We just found out this morning that BYU finishes number 13 in the final AP poll. Do you feel like number 13 is fair given the context of everything that happened late in the season?
It's fair-ish. I mean, you can make a case that BYU should be ahead of number 12, SMU. BYU won that game head-to-head.
Yeah.
And then SMU went on to lose in the ACC championship game, lose in the college football playoff. And so were those losses enough to be ahead of a 2-loss BYU team that beat them head-to-head? I have got to wonder why they made that decision. But at the same time, that's still a lofty finish for BYU, especially considered where people expected them to be, not themselves, but certainly outside the media and pundits expected BYU. They expected them just to get smoked again in the Big 12, and it didn't happen that way. BYU finished tied for first place and only missed the Big 12 championship game because of a tiebreaker. And so I think finishing 13 in the AP poll is good-ish. I would have rather they be at number 12 ahead of SMU, but it's not enough to get upset about. I think it's a nice bow on top of a magnificent season.
It was spectacular, and now BYU's got some juice going into next year. ESPN has BYU as high as number 9 in their way too early top 25 poll. What are your expectations going into next year?
My expectations are they pick up where they left off last year. Now, in 2024, the thing is they had some really close wins in 2024. But that Kansas loss, for example, they should not have lost that game. No disrespect to Kansas. They only played about a half against Arizona State. That was a game that they could have won. And so while they won a few that came close to losing, they lost two that really, they'll tell you that they should have won. And so I think BYU is right there on the cusp of being a team that would have made the playoffs. And I think to compete for that kind of a spot next year is something that they should do. With the quarterback coming back in Jake Retzlaff, they'll have one of the more experienced and successful quarterbacks coming back in the nation next year. The receiving core is fantastic. The offensive line seems to be restocked and reloaded. The linebacking core will be one of the best in the nation. I think it'll come down to the rebuilt, reconstituted defensive line. They brought in some really good transfers, some really good young players to go with some guys that played a lot of football for them over the course of last season. But that's got to gel into a cohesive unit with at least a 2-deep rotation that can play at the highest level. And as long as that happens, there's no reason to believe that BYU can't be competing at the end of the season for what they were competing for at the end of the 2024 season, which is to say, conference championship game, win that, playoff berth. And when you get a playoff berth, ask Notre Dame, anything can happen.
Trevor Matich is on BYU Sports Nation. Without question, it feels like where Jake Retzlaff goes at quarterback, BYU goes as well. And a solid campaign this year, no doubt, Trevor. But where do you feel like Jake Retzlaff needs to take the next step if BYU is going to take that next step and not just be in the Big 12 title hunt, but actually do it this time around?
It's kind of counterintuitive, because what got him to this point and what allowed him to lead BYU to such a fantastic season was the fact that he's such a playmaker, off-schedule playmaker. So when things start to break down a little bit, he is able to create on the move. He's able to fit the ball into really tight windows. And a couple of times, those balls were caught by the other side. But at the same time, his ability to fit the ball into tight windows is one of the big reasons why BYU won 11 games in 2024. And so I think that working on his footwork, working on his release a little bit, he's got a bit of a sidearm release, but especially marrying his feet with his eyes and his shoulders as he goes through his progressions will make him an even more accurate passer. And that'll also get him more wedded to the progressions in the scheme. You know, we talk a lot about the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Tom Brady was a scheme magician. He knew where his players were going to be. He knew from before the snap what the likely positions and assignments of the defensive players were going to be. He confirmed that after the snap, and he knew right away how to get the ball out. Now you take a guy like Patrick Mahomes, who in college was a slinger, was a guy that just created all the time. Didn't play within the system very much at Texas Tech. In the NFL, he plays within the system much more and has retained that ability to be able to be a creative guy when things start to break down. I think Retzlaff is a lot more like Mahomes in terms of style, where we know he can go out there and sling the ball all over the field. Now, as he adds what Mahomes has with the Chiefs, as he adds more precision with his technique and with his reads to get more done within the scheme, and then go outside the scheme when he needs to, that's how he goes to the next level next year.
Retzlaff has some of that shortstop in him with those sidearm throws. Kind of fun. Okay, next year, certainly BYU wants to recreate, pick up where they left off, sustain what they did last year. Besides that, what questions or concerns do you have about BYU going into next season?
Well, there's two big questions. First is, how do they handle success? Because when you struggle like they did last year, and then nobody has any respect for you coming into this year in terms of your ability to compete in the Big 12, it's you against the world. And that is great for a football team, because now you're trying to prove everybody wrong, and you're a band of brothers, and you feel like you're being disrespected. And really the greatest gift you can give a football player or team is to make them feel disrespected, whether it's real or whether it's just imagined. It doesn't matter as long as that feeling is there. Well, now all of a sudden they go from the hunter to the hunted. Now they go to a team that everybody expects will compete for the Big 12 championship and a potential playoff berth. And how do they perform then? Coach Nick Saban, formerly of Alabama, always talked about how the hardest thing to do is take a team that's winning and get them to continue to do the things in practice and off the field with the same urgency and the same focus that they did in order to get from not winning to winning. And it's not that guys don't work as hard. They think they're working hard, but the sense of urgency and focus is different when you're not winning. Well, now BYU needs to do what they need to do. They need to repeat their preparation and their focus and their urgency as a team with high expectations going into next season. If they're able to do that, they should be able to have a very, very good season. If they're not, they won't maximize their talent. And that would be a lesson that they should not have to learn. They should understand that.
It's a Trevor Tuesday on BYU Sports Nation. Again, BYU finishing number 13 and doing so in a Power 4 conference brings up an interesting conversation. Well, given the difficulty of the schedule and what BYU was dealing with compared to BYU teams in the past, where does this BYU team rank in the pantheon of the great BYU teams in the history of this storied football program, Trevor? Where would you place this team in that list?
You would have to consider this team as among the greatest seasons ever in BYU football history. And the reason is what they did has never been attempted before because BYU has never been in a power conference before. And here in their second year in the Big 12, they won 11 games and they capped it off with a convincing bowl win against the Colorado team who played their Heisman Trophy winner and their quarterback, who will probably be a top 5 pick in the NFL coming up in a few months. And Colorado wanted to win that game. They wanted to go out on a high note. Their stars played. BYU defeated them in convincing fashion. And I think that when you put together what they did in the conference that they did it in, they did something that BYU football has never done before. So you can look at the wins, you can look at the losses, and you can balance those things. You can look at, they beat SMU, who ended up making the playoff. They were highly ranked at the end of the season, SMU. And this is a great season if you just go by the numbers. But if you look at it from a big picture standpoint, BYU in 2024 did something that no BYU team has ever been asked to do, and no BYU team has ever done because of that. And that's in a power conference, win 11 games, wrap it up with a convincing win, and end up 13th in the nation in their second year in that power conference. And you have to consider this season, because of all of that, one of the greatest seasons in the history of BYU football.
Preach, Trevor. We appreciate it. Hey, this is our last conversation, maybe for a few months, so we'll see what happens. But we really appreciate having you on every week on the show. I get comments, I know Spencer does, of like the great guests we get, and a lot of people say, hey, Trevor Matich is my favorite. So thanks for being on the show every week. We love having your former player at BYU, NFL, ESPN thoughts. It's great, man. We've really enjoyed like a decade plus of having you here, man.
You know what? That's very gracious to say, and I'm humbled to hear that. You guys are fantastic, though. I mean, you have a great show, and you both are consummate pros, and I just love coming on with you. It's really fun. So thank you for having me on your show.
Trevor, we appreciate you. Be well. Can't wait to talk to you again. And as always, as Jeremy said, you are appointment viewing, my friend. Keep doing your thing.
Thanks, guys.
Trevor Matich on BYU Sports Nation.
We're lucky to have Trevor on this program.
Recapping an outstanding, historic college football season. And yes, we are very lucky that he got to help us navigate through one of the all-time great seasons in BYU football.
He's one of
history.
our guys in Bristol, and he comes on the show. It's great.
Every
Trevor's great.
week.